Please welcome Ms. Jennifer Dornbush.
Thank you. Hi, welcome everybody today. Thank you for being here. And we're going to start off by talking about crime, one of my favorite subjects. And today we're going to talk about 11 crime story types. And before I get into all that, I want to just clearly define what I mean by crime, because there's a lot of definitions out there. So we're talking about crime dramas, procedurals, mysteries, thrillers, suspense, cozy mysteries. All of that is what I'm going to be talking about today in the crime genre. So when you think about how big that is, it's really easy to understand that in our landscape of entertainment media, crime shows rule the airwaves. You literally cannot turn on your TV, your cable, or your streaming device without stumbling upon a dozen crime shows any time of the day or night, 24-hour cycle. This is because we have an insatiable appetite for them, and I'm going to talk a little bit in a second on why I think we have this insatiable appetite. But if you don't believe me, or if you want to check a little further, you can just check out a few resources like shortlist.com, 20 crime dramas to binge on Netflix, or maybe from the BBC, the best new crime dramas, or mysterytribune.com lists the 40 best crime drama thriller shows, or from Refinery29, our favorite crime shows of all time. So, I mean, this is a huge, huge, huge industry and a huge genre. And why do we love them? Why do we love crime shows so much? And I know this might be a little hard to see the two pictures, but you can. The first one on top, does anybody recognize where that one's from? You can. Yeah, Stand By Me. Yep. And then if you look at the bottom one, does anybody recognize that one? Stranger Things. And it's so fascinating to me because these are what, maybe 30 years apart, and even the positioning of the characters is like almost the same. 30 years and we're still, and both of these are crime shows, crime stories, and it's insatiable for us. So why do we love them? Why do we love crime stories so much? What do you guys think? Any thoughts? They're intense. We want to solve it. Yeah.
Good mystery.
Good mystery. Exactly. I have a friend who says he thinks that we love crime genre because there are accountants in the world. And what he means by that is that exactly what you said. We love solving puzzles, and we want to feel like we've accomplished something. I mean, why do we do Sudoku or jigsaw puzzles or watch crime shows? Because we want things to be black and white. I also think that we love this genre so much because we know what to expect in this genre. When you turn on a crime show and you tune into a film or a television show that is a mystery, you know that there's a formula to it. There's kind of this safe paradigm, and so you can just kind of settle into it because you know what that ride's going to be. You're excited to see where it's going to go, but you're like, yeah, I know this ride. I'm safe here. Another reason I think we love this genre so much is because we get exposure to new worlds. Think about, okay, Breaking Bad, for instance. How many of us actually live in New Mexico in the methamphetamine world? Not too many of us, I'm guessing. So we got to go into that world and see what that was like. With Stranger Things, we get to go back into the 80s into this like weird town with this supernatural thing happening, and we get to explore the mystery that's going on. And I could go on, but I think it's so fun because every new crime show is really a new world that we get to explore. The fourth reason that I think we love this genre and it's so popular is because in this world, typically 99.9% of the time, the wrongs are righted and justice is served, and chaos is ordered in this world, and we get to see the bad guys taken away. So all that chaos and that stuff that happens in our world that sometimes, a lot of times, doesn't get resolved. We don't always get justice for things. We don't always see chaos ordered. Bad guys do get away in our real world. We get to tune into a crime show, and none of that will happen. We know at the end the bad guy's going to get caught, chaos is going to be ordered, and justice is going to be served. And there's something very cathartic and satisfying about that. And then the last reason Oops, too many. One of the last reasons that I think we love this genre so much, I don't know about you, but my daily life is kind of filled with mysteries and problems that I can't always solve. And a lot of them go unsolved and unresolved, or may take a long time to get resolved. It doesn't take 48 minutes and my problem is resolved and my mystery is solved in my life. And so because I think our lives are so full of mystery and problems that don't always get resolved, or maybe not get resolved in a way we find very satisfying, when we sit down to watch a crime show, we know at the end the mystery is going to be revealed. We're going to find out who done it, why they done it, and the problem that was brought up in the first couple minutes of the show or the film is going to be solved. And so again, it's very cathartic and satisfying to us because, again, in our real life, day to day, that doesn't always happen. So when I get into the meat of the crime story type. So when I started writing in the crime genre about 15 years ago, you know, when you start writing or creating anything, you start to ask those questions of yourself, like, well, what is it I want to create? What kind of stories do I want to put out into the world? Where do I fit in? And it became pretty clear to me quickly that I loved this genre, but I didn't know, I was a consumer of it, a voracious consumer of this genre, but I hadn't really studied it as a writer, as somebody who was going to contribute to this genre. And I started looking around and couldn't find a lot of resources that really helped explain to me what was the landscape of this genre. So I spent a lot of time looking at a lot of shows and a lot of films, and from all that research I realized, there's kind of about 11 basic crime story types. So I want to share those with you today, and that way if you're interested in this genre, or if you're already writing in this genre, or you are thinking about writing in this genre, you can kind of see what the landscape is and start to think about which one's best for you and where you might fit into that landscape. Okay, so the first one is what I just call the traditional cop detective story. And in all of these, there's two things that stand out that change. The protagonist changes and the setting or the world changes. And those are kind of the ground floor things that you'll need to consider. So in your traditional cop or detective story, and we're going back to the beginning of television here, Dragnet, I mean, this is foundational stuff, all the way to like Blue Bloods, Law and Order. Your investigator protagonist is typically a cop or a detective, somebody who's in law enforcement. And your setting or your world is going to be a law enforcement agency or a government agency that does law enforcement, like the FBI or the CIA. And so the focus of the crime solving in this kind of crime genre is really looking at it from a law enforcement point of view. So the protagonist is going within the bounds of their law enforcement to try to figure out the case. So very traditional. We love these. Okay, the second one, and again, these aren't really in any order of importance or significance, is legal crime solving. So in legal crime solving mysteries like The Practice, The Closer, The Good Wife, your protagonist investigator is typically going to be an attorney, a lawyer, a prosecutor, a defense attorney, or a judge. And the setting or the world of this story, of this mystery, is typically going to be in the legal world. So whether that's in a courtroom or a law office. So the crime solving in this case is very focused on how science is applied to the law, because forensic science is just how science is applied to the law. So your investigator, your protagonist, is really using the law and the legal system to try to figure out who did it and how to solve the case and how to bring the case to justice. All right, third one. This one's a lot of fun. Paranormal mysteries. So you have your X-Files, your Medium, your Supernatural, Arrival, Stranger Things. These are a lot of fun, and this one's a little different than the other 11 in that the setting or the world of this you get to create, right? Because you may be dealing with a natural world, but you're also dealing with a supernatural world. So if you're into creating new worlds, this is a great crime story type for you. And your protagonist is generally going to be somebody who's either interested in the supernatural world, or maybe is part of the supernatural world, or has a connection with the supernatural world, or maybe a special skill to deal with the otherworldly. And I think of Supernatural and those two brothers, and they're just kind of normal guys, but they kind of have this special skill in dealing with the supernatural world. And so your crime solving in this crime story type is really focused on exploring the elements and the evidence that's found in the supernatural world and its inhabitants, and then how they relate to sort of the maladies and misdoings that are happening around them. All right, the fourth one, and dear to my heart, having grown up in a forensic home, is the forensic mystery. So these include your CSIs, your NCISs, your cold cases, any kind of setting or world that is specific to crime scene analysis. So anything dealing with forensics and how forensic evidence is used surrounding the crime or the victim or the case to solve that case. So typically your protagonists are going to be crime scene investigators, forensic specialists. They're going to be, and these are non-sworn people. These are not law enforcement, despite what we may see on television. They cannot carry guns. They cannot enforce the law. All they can do is, not all, it's a big job, but what they do is they take all that evidence and they help lead us to conclusions about what does that evidence mean in terms of who did the crime and where it was done and how it was done. So if you're very science-minded and you like kind of that logical, very black and white, I want science to prove this, this is a great crime story type for you. And then also fifth, and close to my heart, is the death investigation or medical examiner crime story type. So with this crime story type, we're talking about Quincy, if you remember Quincy from way back in the 80s, Crossing Jordan in the 90s, more recently Bones and Body of Proof. There was a show last year called Rosewood, was about a medical examiner. So obviously you're seeing that your main protagonist, your investigator, is a coroner or a medical examiner, somebody who's trained to actually look at the body and figure out from the corpse how did this person die, why did they die, how did they die, what were the factors involved in their death, and using that to help solve the case. So of course the setting for this world is definitely going to be more in the death investigation, the morgue, the crime lab, those places. All right, number 6. Number 6 is really interesting crime story type, the medical mystery. This one is different than any other of the 11 in that it takes place in a medical world. So your protagonists are your doctors, your nurses, any medical professionals. And instead, in this crime story type, instead of the protagonist trying to figure out how did somebody die, they're trying to figure out how do I keep somebody alive. So think of House. Every single episode, it's a mystery. This person comes in, looks like they're dying, there's something horribly wrong with them, and it's his job to uncover the mystery of what's wrong with them and how do I keep them alive by the end of the episode. And this is also a crime story type that goes way back to the beginning history of television, way back to like Medic. If you kind of watch any of these really old Medic or Emergency, it's all kind of focused on this doctor trying to, keep these patients alive and figure out how did they get sick and where did it come from. All right. Oops, what did I do? There we go. There we go. Number 7. Number 7 is the profiler mystery crime story type. So if you love psychology and looking into the criminal mind, this is an amazing story type for you. So we're talking about Lie to Me, The Mentalist, Criminal Minds. Your protagonist in this, your protagonist investigator, is going to be a professional psychologist or psychiatrist, and his or her job is working in the world of psychology, trying to figure out how was the crime committed based on what was going on inside the mind of the criminal. So crime solving is very focused on explaining more of the psychological aspects to the crime. moving along to number 8. This is called the action-adventure or thriller crime story type. We're looking at shows like Southland, 24, The Wire, The Killing, Walking Dead, American Crime, which unfortunately just got canceled. These are story types where your protagonist is probably a high adventure seeker, a risk taker, a survivalist, some sort of professional or specialist in a certain field, not necessarily law enforcement, not necessarily forensics, but has some sort of special skill. And is somehow uniquely qualified to fight whatever danger is presented to them. So the setting, the world for this is usually, it's this really interesting crime story type because you can go really deep into a place where there's a lot of criminal activity, like deep, dark criminal activity. There's an overwhelming focus on like grit, raw violence, high shock value. There's usually like this race against time and this fight for survival. I just started watching that new series on Netflix, Ozark, which totally fits this. It's this really interesting, you're going really deep into this really dark crime world with this protagonist who's very uniquely situated to deal with this crime. So the crime solving in this genre is really focused on survival and risk taking. And what's also interesting, which I think is appealing to a lot of us, is that it's often accomplished outside the bonds of common law or social mores. So people are doing things that you really could never get away with or you shouldn't be able to get away with, and that's why we love to watch them too, to see if they're gonna be able to get away with it. All right, number 9, the amateur sleuth. I personally love this, and I think a lot of us love this crime story type. We're talking about Veronica Mars, Pushing Daisies, Murder, She Wrote, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, The Father Dowling Mysteries. You can see how varied these are, right, in tone and style. But what's interesting is your protagonist in this is just a normal person like us. And they're not necessarily skilled or trained in any sort of investigative techniques. They're a fish out of water. And a lot of times they're learning on the fly. They've been sort of drug into investigating something that they really didn't think they were going to or need to or even wanted to investigate. And so they're kind of the reluctant hero and they're being pulled along. But they learn to embrace it and they learn to love it. And the crime solving too, what I love about this genre is the crime solving in amateur sleuth is done usually in a very unconventional way. A lot of times outside of the law enforcement and done more inconsistent with the manners or skills of your protagonist. So like for instance, Veronica Mars, right? The setting, and the settings for these can be really anywhere. Veronica Mars, the setting was a high school, right? High school. Pushing Daisies, it's a bakery, the pie hole. So again, it can be a lot of different areas and a lot of different types of characters that get pulled into this genre. Okay, number 10. Humorous detecting. A great crime story type if you like humor, if you like writing comedy. We're talking about Moonlighting, Monk, Psych, Castle. There's a new one I'm completely addicted to called Angie Tribeca. If you've ever seen it, it has more like that airplane kind of comedy. The protagonist, investigator in this crime genre, it can be a professional or an amateur, either way. And the thing is that humor is the key in their detecting. So we watch this type of story type because we're watching for the quirks of the investigator. Like think about Monk, totally quirky character. We're tuning in every week because we want to see how is this guy's OCD going to affect his cases and how he solves them and if he solves them. And so again, the setting or the world for this can be a multitude of places. It could be a detective agency. It could be a police agency. It could be a high school. It could be really anywhere. And last but not least, the caper. And this one is really different from the other ones too. I would say this one shows up a little less often, but a really interesting crime story type. So we're talking about Ocean's 11, Breaking Bad, Luther, Dexter, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, if we go way back. And then an amazing film from last year called Hell or High Water. I don't know how many of you saw it. Amazing. These are all capers. So in the caper, your protagonist is the criminal, not the person trying to solve the crime. It's the one committing the crime. And the antagonist is the good guy or the cop. And so it's the one and only crime story type that we're actually rooting for the criminal to win. Why? Why do we want the criminal to win? Because it's usually there's an empathetic reason. There's some way that that person has been wronged, or maybe there's a revenge in play, and somehow that person is trying to make things right in his world, and we're just or her world, and we're just all on board for that. The setting can be anywhere. It could be anywhere. It's usually deep within the criminal world, and we kind of like that because I think we like seeing how the criminal world ticks and how it all works. And again, the protagonist can be really anybody that has a very empathetic cause. If you think of Hell or High Water, you think of those two brothers who are trying to make good on their mother's home and get it out of foreclosure so that they can pass it on to the next generation. And that's the whole impetus for all the crimes that they commit. And we're rooting for them all the way through. So there you have it, 11 crime story types. And if you want to connect with me after this, please do. There's a myriad of ways. So thank you and stay curious.